Welcome to this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast, the first podcast dedicated to helping civil engineering professionals succeed in work and life. I'm your host, James Taylor, and in this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast, I'll be talking with Terry Dussault, president of Yellowknife Consulting Services, about essential steps for enhancing safety, the benefits of implementing systems focused on hazard communication and safe workplace standards, and how these strategies can significantly improve employee productivity and morale. Whether you're a seasoned professional or you're just starting your career, this episode is packed with valuable insights and advice to help you ensure workplace safety and environmental compliance. So grab your headphones and join us as we navigate the path to a safer, more productive workplace.
Before we dive in, we'd like to recognize our sponsor for this episode, PPI, a leader in engineering exam prep for the FE and PE exams. PPI provides expert prep courses and study resources designed to help you pass the FE and PE exams the first time. PPI's live online courses include hours of lectures, problem-solving demonstrations, exam strategy sessions, office hours, and a passing guarantee. Check out PPI today at ppi2pass.com to see all the options available for FE and PE exam prep. Now let's dive into today's episode.
It's now time for our civil engineering conversation of the week with Terry Dussault. Terry, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me today.
Yep, no problem. Terry, let's get right into it. Can you discuss your journey from a corporate EH&S professional to founding Yellowknife Consulting Services?
Yeah, sure. So I think safety kind of has always been part of what I've done in my, work life. And although it wasn't really official probably until the 90s, I worked for a company that was founded by John Wayne. And that was my first official job title as a safety manager at this production company. They manufactured environmental remediation equipment there. And then just over the course of my career, it seems like safety has always been a part of it. And more officially, when I got into working for oil and gas companies, it just started becoming a little bit more till eventually I went to school for it and, got a certification. So that's kind of how I started. And then when I decided to get into my own consulting, I already had the background, having worked in safety. And so it made it kind of easy for me, to be honest with you. That was, pretty easy transition.
So what are the essential steps supervisors need to be equipped with for enhancing safety in the workplace?
I think the main thing that I see is it's training. Okay, so paper is one side of it and the training, and then the practice part is the other side. And I've seen a lot where supervisors, they kind of get some surface training, but it's really not enough. And so I think a lot of employers, by thoroughly training the supervisors and then, doing follow-up to make sure that it's being executed the way the company really wants it to be executed. And all supervisors are not created equal. Some of them are really good at doing the safety side of it. And some of them, they need some ongoing kind of like nurturing and help. It just depends on how good they are with people. And I always say you get farther with sugar than you do with vinegar. And so some supervisors will, try and push really hard. And it's, sometimes it just doesn't work out so well when it's like that. So
you talked about the paper and the practical. I think we've all seen that even in other things besides just safety.
Right.
It seems like sometimes we can just gravitate to the paper aspect of doing something that, okay, here's your read through this and answer the questions. Can you talk about a little bit about the practical side of safety and how do you do that in a training aspect?
Yeah, that's a great question. And mainly because sometimes when you're in that training, it's like it could be a classroom training. So exercises are good just to make sure, that people are, catching on to what you're saying. And sometimes, in a classroom setting, people will just space out, and having little exercises and things for them to do is great. And then when you go out into the field side of it, let's say you're out on a job site, maybe you've done like man lift training, you can only do so much in the classroom. Then you have to get that person in the equipment, let them operate it and see, how they perform. And then also, kind of like capture their performance through an evaluation form. So there's a lot of ways, you can mix it up. I know one of the big utility companies here was having a problem with a lot of utility strikes. This is something that's a big problem throughout the U.S. On all types of construction sites, big and small. And they set up a training center that was really unique. And the way they did it was they got this property and they dug it all up and they put in all these utilities, different scenarios like water lines, gas lines, you name it, fiber optic lines. And then they would have the crews follow the procedures that they were taught, and then go get the shovels or get on the heavy equipment and start digging using what you were taught to see if you can excavate these utilities without damaging them. So thinking outside the box is kind of important on some of the stuff, especially if it's high risk, high risk.
Yeah, that's a really cool example of basically a simulation type thing, right?
Uh-huh.
Like it's still applying the classroom technique, but it's obviously much less risky than, hey, go out and do it in a live environment and, see what happens and test it that way. The simulation aspect with it is a great way to really figure out is, one, are people understanding what's going on, but two, is what you're teaching actually making a difference in what's going on.
Yeah. And, the other thing I'll mention too, James, is that a lot of employers want to do the right thing and they put money out to do the training, but they're not measuring the effectiveness of the training. So a lot of times, there's more that could be done. Just adding one more step, like you said, a simulation or some kind of exercise, because not everybody learns the same way.
No, exactly. So, there's all those different ways of learning. You got the the hear, the see, the do, the teach of the kind of the four main categories. But the more you're able to diversify that to everyone is such a great way to make sure that the training is picked up on.
Yeah.
Terry, how does implementing a system focused on hazard communication and safe work standards impact employee productivity and morale based on your observations?
Okay, so that's kind of a tricky one. So I look at it like when you're talking hazardous communication, some of your viewers might be thinking the chemical side, HazCom, right? But I also look at it like hazard identification, right? And anyway, those two things are really important, and it's good. I think the employees, they need structure. And so having policies and procedures that help with these areas and having structure, it actually makes a lot of the workers feel safe. And if you go to a company where there's really nothing going on the safety side of things, you can tell, the morale is not the same as if it is when you have a solid, safety program or procedures. For example, I have a client. They were out at this site, and it's kind of like a big residential area, and there's a fueling terminal and a refinery nearby that contaminated this neighborhood. And one of the companies that was out there is really solid on their safety policies and procedures, and I actually wrote a safety plan for them for that project. And when I went out, they asked me to do a site inspection. And the interesting thing was I was out there for a few hours one day. The company that they were doing work for, a lot of their employees had not been exposed to the level of safety that they were requiring their employees to comply with.
Interesting.
And the interesting thing was, this was an ongoing project for a while. After a while, the workers that were working at the company with loose safety standards, a lot of them wanted to go to work for the other company. And they asked if there was any opportunities to maybe jump ship and come over there. I'm not saying that that's the only reason, but I'm just saying, I think that they got the feeling management cared. There was some structure in place. They had to perform their tasks according to these documents called job safety analysis or activity hazard analysis forms. And so there's some structure there, and I think they really like that. And
and with that being said, right, like, what better way to show that you care about your employees than making sure that you're looking out for their safety, right? I mean, it's very clear there of as an employer, if you are putting those systems in place like you talked about, right, the employees are going to be happier because they're not concerned about, are they walking into an unsafe environment? They're like, hey, I've been trained for this. I know what's going on. I feel better about this. And instead of worrying about what might pop up, they're prepared for those types of things.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. What insights can you share about the main factors driving the increases in, the hazardous communication, the safe workplaces, the strikes, as you mentioned before, and how can businesses effectively manage these risks?
Yeah, I think with the drivers in this really is that a lot of companies, if they start out small, I have some clients that are small, some of them that have 300 or 400 employees, and the common denominator is that once the companies start to have incidents occur and they feel the pain, and that could be financial, it could be some kind of regulatory fine or exceedance, somebody got hurt, property damage incidents, or one of the other ones is security incidents. When they start to feel the pain of, those kinds of losses, then they, really start to pay attention, and they start to try and figure out, what can they do that's better, and how can they fix the problem. And so I think that was one part of your question, that there was another piece to it. What was the...
How can businesses effectively manage those risks as they, since they're increasing, how can they effectively manage them?
Yeah. So mainly, I think having a solid safety program in place, and having, systems like incident reporting. Some companies even have, near miss reporting programs where, something that almost turned into an incident was reported. And so they take that information and they share it, amongst the other employees or their other departments or facilities. And sometimes you'll find common threads. So, like, for example, I have one client that is struggling right now. They do some work, and they do a lot of, we'll say, like these gun range cleanups, right? And so one of the problems that they're having there is lead exposure. And they have all the right systems in place, but there's some kind of an issue where, the workers are still being exposed somehow. They've got the right equipment, they've got the right PPE, and those kinds of things. And maybe if they did frequent site inspections, they would have been able to identify this stuff early, like where the gap is,
right,
or if there was near miss reporting and that kind of thing. And some companies I've proposed to start a near miss reporting program, and they're like, Terry, we don't really have time for that, or we don't want to take it to that level. And so if that's what they say, there's nothing I can really do about it. I'm a consultant. I'm going to lay out everything that I think would benefit you, and some things you may want to do it, and other things you could tell me to go pound sand, right? But it's funny how later on it sometimes comes up again. Like
they're coming back to you, right?
Yeah, like
they're like, hey.
Yeah, I had a
Remember
client.
when you told us this?
Yeah, I had a client. They got a they had a $750,000 loss. because of a misdirected waste incident where some contaminated waste went to the wrong disposal facility. And so the cleanup cost of it was $750,000. That's not counting their insurance premiums that went up for $300,000 a year. Now that would put a lot of companies out of business, and so there's a lot of reasons to, have systems in place to protect the company. And also the most important thing is that management and ownership should want these things because it's a sustainability issue. If you don't have certain things in place and you're doing high risk work, eventually something is going to happen. So you don't want to wait and just rely on luck to keep your company from, having these expensive losses or even fatalities and that kind of thing. You need to have some controls in place. And that's the key reason for why companies should have a solid safety program, and that why workers should want to work safe.
Yeah.
If you get one injury, it could be life-changing, and it could prevent you from not being able to work properly. And that's a lifelong impact.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Yes. Yeah. So the safety aspect, it affects every single person in a company. It's not just the employee, but it's the management, it's the ownership, everything. And that's why safety needs to be a high priority in everything that we do in the industry. Safety needs to be at the forefront. I want to take a moment to dive a little bit deeper into the topic of safety and look at the powered industrial trucks and forklifts for a second. OSHA has some stringent regulations on the powered industrial trucks, forklifts. What rationale do you see behind this oversight, and what strategies do you recommend for employers to ensure compliance and safety related to these things?
Yeah, so I think with powered industrial trucks, the reason there's so much regulation around it is really because of how dangerous they are and the number of incidents that OSHA sees regularly, like on an annual basis. That's one of the highest incident rates for equipment is, forklifts. And I think the reason for it is because they're so prevalent. There's thousands and thousands of them all over the U.S. and they're very effective. I like forklifts, but I've also seen the ugly side where, people have gotten hurt. I saw a guy take a fork right to the knee, and that was a life-changing event for him. He'll never work in the industry he was in, and that was the entertainment industry. I saw a person take a fork from a reach lift to the rib cage, and that one luckily didn't, break a rib, but bruised the guy's ribs pretty good. So rollovers, I've seen rollovers with forklifts. They're very dangerous, but a great tool, or a great tool. And I think that, the reason for the regulation is simply just that they're dangerous.
So what do you recommend for employers to ensure compliance and safety related to those devices?
Yeah. So mainly it's going to be, again, it always goes back to training.
Yep.
And then also doing some observations of how the operators are using the equipment. That's super important because, sometimes, they might just, be driving them too fast.
Right.
You might have workers that are too close. They're in close proximity to the machines and they're fast.
Yeah.
So, and then in warehouse settings, it's different. It's good to have lanes and they have mirrors and things. So there's a lot of safeguards and things you could put in that are engineering controls.
I think a lot of people have seen the oh no videos or the, where, the guy's driving the forklift and bumps into in the warehouse and bumps into the whole thing and everything falls. Like, unfortunately, it seems like that's one of the more prevalent types of blooper videos is related to that, but there's a huge safety aspect related to that as well. And it sounds like training and the oversight is really the two big pieces to working with the compliance with the safety.
Yeah, I'll tell you something interesting that happened. I was involved with a project where we had to hire 100 workers to do this work, and we built 5-man teams or 5-person teams, and there was 20 of them roughly. So each team had an operator that was hired directly from the union, the operators union in Los Angeles here. And we started seeing a spike in incidents because all of a sudden we have, for every team now, we've got an operator. So there's 20 new equipment operators, and they're all operating the same type of equipment. It's a reach lift. So it's a forklift that, extends, right. And it's a really great tool. So we started seeing property damage incidents. We started seeing a lot of near misses. That's the project where I saw the guy get, poked in the ribs with the fork. There was a whole bunch of issues. So we decided that, even though they came from the union, the operators union, and they've been trained, my concern was if somebody gets hurt, OSHA can come to the employer and say, hey, did you train them?
Right.
And it doesn't matter if they were trained in the union or not. If the employer didn't train them, then the employer is on the hook. So
that's interesting.
We said, okay, we need to regroup on this. So we had them all come to this facility. We had one trainer do the classroom portion of the training again with all these operators. And then I set up another training, a practical training. And we fenced off this location. It was inside a warehouse, and we brought in all these reach lifts. I think we had like 3 of them. And we brought the workers in 2 at a time, and we made it to where they couldn't see the obstacle course.
Okay.
And we actually sabotaged the equipment because what I wanted to see is the first thing you're supposed to do is do an equipment inspection. And so we just handed them all their clipboards with the inspection forms. And when they come in, they say, what do you want us to do? Well, what would you do if you were at the job site? Well, that's what we asked. And they actually looked a little perplexed. And so I said, do the equipment inspection. So some of them were pretty good. And they found that, we removed gas caps. We took dipsticks out. We messed up the seat belts, and, we did a whole bunch of different little things.
Yeah.
And at first, when all these operators were in the classroom setting, I walked into the classroom, and some of them were like, they didn't want to pay attention.
Or even the, why am I here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I walked in, and that kind of irks me a little bit because the trainer was good. So I said, hey, I just want you guys to know that the seriousness of this training, and I told them why, because the spike in incidents and all these things. But I said, I know some of you, I walk in and I see some of you really not paying attention here. And I want you to know that if you fail this training today, there's no job for you at the end of the day. Okay, that's how serious it is, because we're not going to tolerate misuse or people, that can't do this, because there's too much that can go wrong.
Right.
The project sites were really small, and we had to have workers in there. So we needed people that were on their A game. So I said, if you guys fail the practical, you're done. There's not going to be a job. So they kind of all sit up and, do the training and take it a little more serious. When they got to the area where I was to do all the practical, just to make a long story short, about 3 or 4 of them failed. And it was really eye-opening. And this is why it's important to do practical tests on people. What I learned, and I would have never known this, is that some people, when they're operating a reach lift, they have problems with depth perception. So we needed these guys and gals to be able to lift these super sacks that weigh 3,000 pounds apiece and put them into the back of a truck to haul off contaminated soil without dropping them or without damaging the truck or anybody else, right?
Yeah.
So it was pretty eye-opening, but I think we had to send some people off, and they were upset.
Yeah, you hate seeing that happen for anyone. Let's dive into another topic that's kind of another increasing issues, I would say, related to safety, and that's people being struck by vehicles. And what strategies are effective in preventing the increase of these occurrences and the consequences of workers being struck by vehicles, trucks, and equipment? You want to talk about that just a little bit in general, about seeing those increases of people getting hit?
Oh, yeah, for sure. This is a topic for me that's really personal. It's personal because when I've been out on job sites over the years, I've seen so many close calls. I've seen people struck. The thing that happens is I think people underestimate the speed of heavy equipment. That's one of the first things. And a lot of times, like, you have miscommunications between people that are on the equipment and ground personnel.
Yep.
So if you have somebody that's supposed to be spotting the equipment, then that person, that ground person that's spotting for the equipment operator, has to be dedicated to that and has to know how to do that. And a lot of people think it's like, oh, we're going to back this truck up and they start doing hand signals, but they've never talked to the equipment operator or the truck driver to establish what the communication is, and so there's a lot of miscommunication. And I've seen people, I saw a girl, she was an engineer, fresh out of college. She was on a job site, an environmental project, and she got pinched between the back of a big rig and a chain link fence. I don't know how, but she literally walked away from it.
Wow.
But she was pretty rattled, and it was a miscommunication.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that needs to be established first. And I think people think they know how to spot, a truck or a vehicle that's backing up or a piece of heavy equipment, but they've never been formally trained.
Right.
That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
For myself, when I'm going out to a construction site and there's active vehicles and construction equipment moving around, my head's on a swivel at all times. Like, because I don't know the people that are using that equipment. I don't know what safety things they've been through. So I know that I need to be looking out for myself from a safety perspective. And most job sites, everyone's going through safety. Safety is a huge thing right now. And always trying to make sure that things are getting better. How about technological advances? Is there anything going on to help from the technological side to address this issue of vehicles people getting hit by vehicles?
I think there is. The thing that I've seen is there's a lot of the heavy equipment now. They have sensors and cameras and things that never existed before.
Right.
Proximity sensors and stuff like that. So that's really amazing that you could even do that. I think that's probably one of the most effective things. It's like, on your car, on the back of a truck, they have the sensors, backup sensors and cameras and things. So I think that from a technological standpoint, there's that. One of the other things that I've noticed, I did some research on this, and I found out that there's on a lot of different types of heavy equipment, the blind spots are in different spots. They're in different spots on the equipment.
Yeah.
And I want to mention this because you would never even consider this. But when I was doing the research, I was on the Caterpillar website, and you can actually download blind spot maps. And on a Cat, I think it's a D5, like a dozer. There's a blind spot that they've identified on the blind spot page that's directly in front of the operator. And you would think if they're up there and they can look out and see straight ahead, that they could see everything. But there's a small little sliver that's right in the middle of the window, and it shows that they can't see anything there. So
wow.
When you really start to look at the maps, it will show you where you should and shouldn't stand when there's heavy equipment. A lot of people don't even know that's available. So they've done a lot of research on that, and I think that's kind of interesting. I would say that's more like an administrative control that could be put into play, during training and things like that, especially with new workers. It's eye-opening, actually, to see how much blind spots there are with some equipment.
Yeah, I can only imagine, and it really does make it difficult as, getting more equipment and making sure you understand each piece of equipment and then the safety issues related to that. Terry, what are some steps that employers can take to protect their workers from airborne contaminants? And how can these measures prevent financial and legal repercussions for the company?
Well, this is a great topic, to be honest. And I write a lot of safety plans for companies that do environmental work, cleanup work. And so a lot of the sites are contaminated, obviously, and it's up to the employer to communicate the hazards. And that means airborne hazards. And sometimes on these project sites, they've been contaminated with insecticides or pesticides, heavy metals like cadmium and chromium from previous plating operations, lead, there's a lot of that. So the way that employers can protect the workers is by doing air monitoring. There's what we call field instruments that are direct read. So you can do, sometimes in the field, you can do direct read, and you'll be able to find out right then and there if there's any kind of contaminants like volatile organic compounds and things like that. Or another way of doing it is by collecting samples. And so one of the projects that I worked on recently was for Gulfstream, where they used to make the jets, and they shut down the facility in Long Beach. And so we had to do a lot of sampling over there. And there's different ways to collect the air samples. But one of the ways we've done it is you use this thing called a SUMA canister. It looks like a stainless steel tank that's under vacuum. And basically you go set it up in the work area, and you flip this valve, and over an 8-hour period, it will suck a small amount of air into the canister. And then at the end of the day, you close the thing and you take it to the laboratory. They'll run analysis on it, and they can tell you exactly what's in the air. And the reason that's important is because every contaminant's different. I was just at a site the other day, and they were measuring the contaminant with a direct read instrument in parts per billion. And they need to know, because when OSHA has, if you go on the OSHA website, or NIOSH, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, you can look up any chemical, and it will tell you what the permissible exposure limit is for a worker, over an 8-hour day.
Right.
And I remember way back when I first started my career, one of the first jobs I had was in aerospace. And my work area, I worked in the sheet metal department. My workbench area was next to a degreaser tank. And the degreaser was this product called trichloroethylene. And it had a nasty smell to it.
Yeah.
And I remember, by 12:30, 1 o'clock in the day, I was getting bad headaches.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I couldn't afford to lose any brain cells, but I'm pretty sure I lost a lot of brain cells there. And they didn't have any kind of air monitoring program, but I know I was being exposed. So, it's important to do the air monitoring and make sure that people aren't being exposed. Sometimes you can't smell it.
No.
But you are being exposed. So it's good. I'm not going to name any names, but I have a person that works at a federal facility, and I'm not going to say which federal facility.
Don't get anyone in trouble here, Terry.
I don't want some guys in black suits showing up at my door, but I think she's under the impression that she could be being exposed.
Oh, wow.
And when she described her work area to me and what was there, I was like, oh man, this could get really ugly. But she's had a lot of health issues since she's been working there. And all the ingredients for some kind of an exposure are, based on what she told me, are there. But the thing is they're not going to allow anybody to go in there and do any kind of air monitoring without some kind of, triggering some kind of, red flag kind of thing. Right. So it's funny that the government or OSHA will mandate that employers have to work to a certain standard, right? But under some circumstances, I don't even know if they comply with their own standards,
Yeah.
So
that's a whole topic for another day.
That's another one. That's
it's a whole other another thing. But Terry, you brought up kind of getting your start in your career in the aerospace industry. What about the biological hazards in the workplace in those areas, especially sectors like manufacturing and aerospace?
I don't think you see a lot of biohazards in those kinds of settings. A lot of them, you would, I guess, like around any kind of bodily fluids, you've got, the potential for biohazards like blood, urine, feces, things like that. I've had people ask me, like, hey, we have this situation happening. Like, one person manages a crew of janitors inside a facility, and in the restrooms that they have to clean, they were talking about what they find, in the stalls and the human feces and all this stuff. And I thought, this is absurd. Like, what you're telling me is way out of line. And so one of the things we were able to do is kind of strategize. Well, wait a minute. What does your contract say? What does your contract say as far as the janitorial? And when we really looked in there, we found out that part of the work that they were doing, they didn't have to do. It wasn't even part of their contract.
Interesting.
So we said, let's take the risk of being exposed completely out of the equation by retraining your workers, and you tell them, this is your limitations of what you're going to clean and what you're not going to clean. And if you ever get to this situation, you have to elevate it to the supervisor, right?
Right.
So sometimes, and then like if you're dealing with sewer pipes, cleaning, or plumbing, there's a potential for exposure to biohazards just through that. So,
I was going to say, and especially in the civil engineering world, and surveying, you might be looking at sewer pipes or things like that. That's really a spot where those biological hazards are present. And need to make sure you're doing the right things to make sure you're not getting contaminants elsewhere.
Yeah, I was just at this morning, I did a site inspection at a wastewater treatment facility. And so they're doing a lot of these treatment facilities are doing infrastructure upgrades and things, right? So there's a lot of plumbing and big pumps and things like that. So there's a lot of ways for people to get exposed in those settings. Pump stations where they pump the sewage and that kind of stuff.
So Terry, I've really enjoyed our conversation on safety today. The last question I have before we jump into our final segment, what advice would you offer to engineers and safety professionals just starting their careers in ensuring workplace safety and environmental compliance?
I would say try and learn as much as you can. Be the best, at what you do. Be a subject matter expert. You realize that safety is integrated into everything that we do, even if we don't realize it. A lot of the systems that are being built, safety's built into it. It's engineered into it. So I think, be open-minded to that and the possibilities of how, new technology could be engineered into what you're working on. I would say integrity is really important, making sure that, you have a high level of integrity throughout your career. I've worked with a lot of people, a lot of engineers actually. And so, I think the ones that I remember the most are the ones that were the sharpest and had the most integrity. And so I've worked with them for over 20 years, so I've had a lot of experience working with engineers. So I think that's an important thing, really important to remember that. And, that will carry you forward, but try and be the best you can be at your job. And as far as the compliance stuff, it's not going away. It seems like the one thing that I have learned over the years, whether it's safety or it's environmental compliance, is the regulations are becoming a little more stringent all the time. And sometimes you're dealing with air quality management districts, you're dealing with water quality boards, like over here we have the Orange County Healthcare Agency is one of the ones that we deal with. And California has so many regulatory agencies. They're state agencies, some of them are just county agencies. So you really got to understand, like, in the projects and the work that you're doing, who's the oversight agencies that you're doing, work for, basically, and understand what the rules and regulations are around that.
Awesome. All right, now it's time for our CE Hot Seat segment of the week with Terry Dussault. Are you ready to go, Terry?
Yes, James. Let's do this.
All right, Terry. Do you have any specific rituals that you practice every day? For example, do you have a specific morning ritual or lunchtime ritual? Things that you do consistently daily that contribute to you being a successful professional?
Yeah, so I think for me, I've always been one to get up early. That's my main ritual, is to get up early and kind of get started. My typical wake-up time is 4:30 every day. And as much as I hate to say it, that's just when I get up, and I would like to try and sleep in during the week, but it just doesn't happen. So getting up early, that's one of my rituals. And usually I'll try and hit the gym too. But
what is one book that you recommend to engineers regularly, or just one book that you have found to be extremely helpful in your professional and or personal development?
I think in my professional development, the one book that I would recommend that's really helped me a lot is the OSHA 1926 Construction Standards book. And they also have one for general industry. It's the 1910 Standards. It's like the Bible of safety. And I think those two books have really helped me out a lot the most.
Thinking back on your managers of the past, picture your favorite manager or managers. What made them your favorite?
Okay, well, this is easy for me. I had a manager who was really good at explaining things. And the thing that I liked, it really made me actually want to become a better teacher to my coworkers and other people. He would take the time, whatever amount of time was needed to talk to somebody and explain something. You would never get the impression that he was ever rushed for time. And he would explain things at a granular level sometimes, but it really helped me a lot in my career. And I really appreciated that. I don't even know if I ever got the chance to tell him that.
I've got one final question, which is the critical civil engineering career elevator advice question. So basically, if you got into an elevator with a civil engineering student and had about 30 to 40 seconds with some career advice, what would it be?
I would say learn as much as you can. And again, try and be a subject matter expert at what you do. And just, a high level of integrity is really important in your career. And so learn as much as you can. I always say shoot for flawless execution and work harder than everybody else. And the reward will always pay off, I think.
Awesome. Well, Terry, thank you so much for joining me today. where can our listeners connect with you?
My website is www.yellowknifesafety.com. That's the best way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Terry. Really appreciate your time today. And again, let's make sure we're being safe out there, right?
Yeah, thanks, James. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast.
Please remember, you can find the show notes for this episode at civilengineeringpodcast.com. There you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during the episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all your civil engineering endeavors.